Hello everyone, Dr. Brenda Hasselbrock here from the Wellness Way affiliate in Houston, Texas in the Memorial area. Welcome to this week's quick tip. We're going to be talking about keeping your mind sharp. And so I'm looking forward to that. I started off, I don't know if you can see with a little cartoon, and it says Forgetful Folks Support Group. It says, "Hi, my name is Ken," and everybody says, "Hi, Larry." And so I started off with a little joke, but when it comes to dementia and forgetfulness and lose your mind, it is no joke. It's really not a joke. And I lost my dad at 77 years old about 11 years ago, and but we had really lost him a number of years before he actually passed. And I can remember when my father-in-law, when he started getting dementia, he would go to the hospital to see his wife. And then he'd forget that he went to see her, and then like 30 minutes later he'd show up again and just said, "Hey, I'm here to see you today." So that's kind of my story with dementia. So, okay, this is all new, so let's try this. All right, so let's look at Alzheimer's and just define what it means. So it's impaired memory, impaired reasoning, impaired cognitive function, and it can actually affect mood and personality as well. So most people believe that it's in our genes and that we have no control over it, that it's something we're bound to happen to us if we live long enough. It will affect 1 million people by 2020, which is just a couple of years from now. Over the next 40 years, it's estimated 115 million new cases at a cost of over $1 trillion. These are alarming statistics. These are alarming numbers that we really need to take a close look at and see what can we do. All right. So Alzheimer's. So the fate of your brain is not in your genes. So it's not like something genetic that you're just doomed and you're going to have it. Basically, it's largely prevented by lifestyle choices and the decisions that we make in our lifestyle. And that's what I want to go over with today. Because if we can get to the root cause of brain disease, I mean, that gives you hope for keeping your faculties as you grow older. So you do have control and you do have power over your destiny when it comes to memory. We're mentally married to ideas that are no longer valid. So I want to replace those invalid beliefs with some real information, scientific and new research that's out there, and with body physiology. All right. So I'm going to go over 4 points. Our number 1 point is gluten. It's not in your genes, it's in the food you eat. Brain function very much relies on what we're putting into our body. Modern grains are not the same grains that our ancestors used to eat. If your gut is bad, it's going to affect your brain. There's so much research, there's so many books out there now about the brain-gut connections. So it's not even a question anymore. It's just, in general, the public doesn't know about it. We've had a major shift in our diet over the past century, and even before that, we were more of a hunter-gatherer, and we went from a high-fat, low-carb diet to more of a low-fat, high-carb diet, and that's part of why we're having some of the changes that we're having. Now, a small percentage of the population do actually have gluten and sensitivities to their gut, and it can be very troublesome. But we have to ask the question, are we all gluten sensitive when it comes to our brain function with the perspective of the brain? All right. So our food pyramid, our American food pyramid, we just need to flip it upside down because it's totally backwards. If you look at the USDA healthy diet, carbs are 65%. 65%. Proteins are 18% and 19% fat. Okay. So if you look at the brain composition in contrast, brain composition is 60% fat, not 19. Proteins, we should have 35% fat, and carbohydrates 4% or less. You need fats to have a healthy brain. It's imperative that you have healthy fats. So eating a low-fat, high-carb diet, a low-fat or no-fat diet doesn't make any sense at all. Our second point that I want to cover today is sugar. There's a big tie-in between diabetes and brain disease. Diabetes doubles the risk for Alzheimer's, doubles your risk for Alzheimer's. Now, glucose or sugar is what we use, our body uses it for fuel and for energy. It takes our food and it converts it into glucose so that we can use it. However, glucose can't go straight into the cells by itself. we need the hormone insulin to ferry it from the bloodstream into the muscles, into the fat, and into the liver. But what happens is we get so overwhelmed with too much sugar in our diets and processed sugar and high fructose corn syrup in our diets that the insulin's pumping like crazy. Now, normal, healthy cells are very sensitive to insulin. But when it keeps pounding, and getting bombarded, the cells reduce their sensitivity. And so then we have insulin resistance. And now the pancreas is having to work harder, pushing more insulin out there to try to get that blood sugar out of the bloodstream and into your body. And then as a result of it, we have more blood sugar floating around in our bloodstream. So type 1 diabetes, let's talk about the different types of diabetes when we're talking about sugar. Type 1 diabetes, small percent of the population, about 5% of the people actually have type 1 diabetes. It's thought to be an autoimmune disease, and they're not really sure if it's genetic or where it comes from. But there's nothing that can be done about that to treat that or cure that. Type 2 diabetes, this is when we have that insulin resistance that I was talking about. So we have higher blood sugar in the blood, and it stays there a longer period of time, and it gets cyclic, and then it actually pushes into type 2 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes, this is insulin resistance with the Alzheimer component. And that insulin resistance is actually what sparks those plaques in the brain from Alzheimer's. And those plaques actually cause cell death and cell dysfunction, and then therefore it affects the memory even more. And the last term on this slide is diabesity. Diabesity, it's a new term that they've come up with, used to describe the metabolic range from disorders, anything from the low to mild insulin resistance to pre-diabetes to full-blown diabetes. It's happening so often, and people that are obese have a higher risk, a much greater risk of brain disease. People that have diabetes, as we said earlier, have double the risk of developing Alzheimer. High blood sugar shrinks your brain. There was a study done at Australian National Institute of Canberra, and they found that patients with blood sugar within the normal range, but on the high end of normal range, showed brain shrinkage. So brain shrinks with dementia and other brain diseases, and that's very well known. All right. Our third points, we've got gluten and we've got sugar. Those are just a couple of pieces of the puzzle. The next thing we're going to talk about is cholesterol. High cholesterol reduces the risk of brain disease, and it increases longevity. Now, I know that sounds counter to anything you've ever heard, counterintuitive to anything you've heard or you've been told, especially by the doctors, especially by the commercials. But high cholesterol is actually good for you, and you need it for brain function. High levels of good fat is key for health and for peak function. All right, there's some studies I want to go over with that too. So the Framingham Heart Study was done. It started back in 1948, and at the Boston University, they recently, in 2005, they examined the relationship between total cholesterol and cognitive performance. And what they found was higher blood cholesterol equaled better mental function. And what they found is that memory, learning, concept formation, concentration, attention, abstract thinking and reasoning, organizational abilities, all things that are compromised with Alzheimer, all those functions were higher with the people that had higher cholesterol. So this Framingham study is the largest study that's been done. It started in 1948. They've already followed 3 generations of participants in this study. Okay, so from that same study, the Boston University, they found this linear association of total cholesterol and brain function. The higher the cholesterol, the higher the brain function, and the different categories that they were checking at. Moreover, participants that had desirable total cholesterol, 200 or less in their cholesterol, they actually fared worse on the testing than those with the borderline, which is 200 to 239, or high cholesterol, which is over 200. The borderline and the high cholesterol participants all fared better in the test for cognitive function. So evidently there is a protective factor when it comes to cholesterol and the brain. Cruelty of statins. So probably one of the most prescribed drugs on the market right now are the statin drugs. Side effects, I don't think you can read what it says here, so I'll read it for you. So side effects include muscle pain, let me read from here, weakness, erectile dysfunction, and memory loss. So those are some of the side effects. But the long-term risks include depression, Alzheimer, dementia, and poor cognitive function. It says so right on their labels. So they know this as they're prescribing it, as they're putting it out there on the market, they know this. And then rates of Alzheimer and dementia, like 115 million new cases in the next 40 years. And this has a big contributing factor to it. So we're designed to have cholesterol. We need cholesterol. Our brain needs cholesterol. Our brain is 2% of our body weight, and 20% of the cholesterol in our body is actually in our brain and used by our brain. And these people say, well, wait a minute, what about coronary artery disease? I mean, we have to be worried about cholesterol in our heart. Well, actually, that's not the problem. Blaming cholesterol and LDL for heart disease, you're barking up the wrong tree. Coronary artery disease has more to do with oxidation and oxidized LDL. And how does LDL get oxidized? Go back to our point number 2, sugar. Sugar actually changes the LDL so it can't properly function. All right, so then it becomes damaged, and then we have more blood sugar in the brain. My last point is inflammation. Our favorite topic at the Wellness Way is inflammation. We talk about it all the time. And we also talk about that inflammation is the start of all disease. Inflammation is actually a natural response to stress. It's a protective mechanism. It's trying to protect us to help us move away from a dangerous or toxic stimulus. So inflammation is a natural response, and it's a warning. And for acute situations, it's great because it helps us to stay safe and protect ourselves. The problem with inflammation is when it's over a long period of time when we have chronic inflammation, and then it goes throughout the whole body and becomes systemic throughout the whole body. All right. What causes inflammation? Constant exposure to irritants. So whether that's the food we eat, like gluten, like sugar, whether it's not having enough good cholesterol, whether it's toxins in the air, all of these things can contribute to that. Let's see, uncontrolled inflammation. It's the number one cause for morbidity and mortality for most of the chronic diseases that we suffer with. Coronary artery disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, they all start with inflammation. Inflammation is number one. We have to control inflammation. And as we said, when we talk about coronary artery disease, it's not really a cholesterol issue as much as it is an oxidation issue. And oxidation is simply biological rusting, and that's a natural process too, but sometimes it gets accelerated by these other factors that we've been mentioning. Okay. There is definitely a direct connection between inflammation and brain disease. The scary part or the sad part about inflammation of the brain doesn't have any pain receptors, so we don't feel pain, we can't feel the inflammation. If you get a splinter in your finger, it gets red, it gets puffy, it gets swollen, you feel it, and you know it's inflamed. But when we have inflammation in our brain, we can't feel it, and we're totally unaware of it. So that's why people are not aware. The scientific community at large knows this information, and they know the inflammation in the brain is very problematic, but the general public doesn't know because we can't feel it. Again, oxidative stress is the rust that we have in our body. So at this point you might be asking, well, Dr. Brenda, what are my risks? And I want to tell you that there are things that you can do to get checked out. There is specific testing available that will give you some indicators and some marker and let you know how you're doing with your brain function. If there's some inflammation markers that are showing up, then there's some things you can do about that. We have to find out what the triggers are, what the stressors are in the body, and remove those and help heal the body and repair it. So you have control over keeping your mind sharp. There's a lot that you can do. Diet's going to be a big part of it. Lifestyle's going to be a big part of it. So get the wheat out of your system and out of your diet as much as you can. There's so many books about and so much research relating gut and brain connection, and how if your gut's inflamed, whether it's from sugar or whether it's from wheat or whatever you're consuming, it's going to have a direct relationship to and a direct effect on your brain. So you do have control over it. It is in your hands. You just have to decide. If you need help with food allergy testing, we can help you out with that. look for a Wellness Way office near you, twwclinics.com, or you can reach me. I'd be glad to help you out. I hope you find this information helpful, but please don't just take it in as good information. Please apply it so that you can have health and keep your mind sharp for a long period of time. All right, thanks a lot. Have a good afternoon.